My name is Zoe Mitchell, and I was 29 the night my parents expected me to buy their love in front of 80 people. The event was their 40th wedding anniversary at a country club overlooking Lake Michigan in Illinois. My mother, Carol, tapped her imported champagne flute and summoned me to the stage. She had seeded a rumor among her tennis partners that I was gifting them an all-expenses-paid Mediterranean cruise, a grand public offering to finally pay them back for the burden of my upbringing. Instead, I walked up to the microphone and handed her a crisp, white envelope. It held a legal decree severing my ties to them forever. When she opened it, my father, Richard, watched his financial safety net vanish, and his face turned to stone. To understand how a daughter decides to legally erase her own bloodline while standing next to a golden retriever wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo collar, you have to understand the math of my childhood. For 22 years, my birthdays passed in silence. No card, no call, no cake. But the dog got catered lakeside pavilions. What I did the morning of their anniversary and the secret legal trap I built while they were busy picking out floral arrangements is the part none of them ever saw coming. Welcome back to QT Told Stories, where ordinary people set hard boundaries and quietly come out ahead. How old were you when you realized your family only kept you around for what you could provide? Drop your age in the comments below and subscribe so the next story reaches you too. These days, I spend 50 hours a week as a family law mediator in downtown Chicago. I sit in rooms with polished oak tables and watch people dissect their broken homes. I help them divide assets, set custody schedules, and untangle years of resentment. I am good at my job because I understand the anatomy of greed. I know how to spot a person who views relationships as a ledger. I learned that skill long before I went to law school. I learned it at my own kitchen table in the wealthy Illinois suburbs. The first brick in the wall I built between myself and my parents was laid 6 months before that country club party. I was sitting in my office drafting a settlement agreement for a client when my phone lit up. It was a text from Carol. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask about my day. There was only a link to a spreadsheet and a single sentence. The spreadsheet was titled 40th Anniversary Gala. I opened the link. It was a masterclass in audacity. Carol had already drafted a guest list of 80 names. She had selected an exclusive country club venue, an upscale menu featuring prime rib and sea bass, and a specific brand of imported champagne she knew cost $200 a bottle. At the very bottom of the spreadsheet, she had added a note in bold text. Zoe will coordinate payment directly with the venue manager. There was no question mark. There was no request. My mother assumed that because I had built a successful practice, I was now an open tab for her vanity projects. I sat at my desk and looked at the estimated total. It was a 6-figure sum. She wanted me to drain my savings to throw a party for 2 people who never paid a dime toward my college tuition or my rent. My parents were the kind of people who bought luxury cars every 3 years, but told me I needed to take out student loans because building character was important. Now that my character was built and my bank account was full, they were ready to collect their return on investment. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Carol. It is the least you can do after everything we provided for you. I did not reply immediately. When you mediate high-conflict divorces, you learn that a fast reaction is exactly what the other side wants. They want you to argue. Arguing means you are still playing the game. I put my phone face down and looked out my window at the Chicago skyline. I let myself feel the cold precision that always takes over when a negotiation turns hostile. I decided to make a phone call to the venue, just to see the exact shape of the trap she was setting. A cheerful event manager named Sarah answered the phone. I introduced myself and asked about the reservation under Carol Mitchell. Sarah was thrilled to speak with me. She explained that my mother had been in that morning to finalize the menu and had explicitly named me as the sole financial sponsor. My mother had even given them my business contact information and told them to expect a deposit by Friday. I realized in that moment this was not just a request for money. It was financial entrapment designed to force my hand in public. Carol knew that if I said no, she could play the victim to 80 of her wealthiest friends. She would sigh over tennis matches and charity luncheons, talking about her selfish, ungrateful daughter, who refused to help her own parents celebrate a milestone. She was using her social circle as leverage. My father, Richard, was a silent architect in this scheme. He perfected the art of standing in the background while Carol did the dirty work. He reaped the benefits of her extortion without ever getting his hands dirty. I thanked the event manager and ended the call. I did not correct the record yet. I knew if I canceled the reservation, my mother would escalate. She would show up at my office or my apartment demanding filial piety. I needed a strategy that offered a permanent solution. I needed to build a shield she could never penetrate. I picked up my phone and opened the text thread with Carol. I did not type out my anger. I did not point out that she had forgotten my past 22 birthdays. I simply typed one ambiguous sentence. I received the list, and I will handle the presentation. I watched the read receipt appear. Less than a minute later, Carol replied with a heart emoji. She read my message as compliance. She assumed I was bowing to the pressure and accepting my role as the family wallet. That assumption was her greatest mistake. Over the next few weeks, she sent me constant updates. She texted me photos of floral centerpieces and linen swatches. She forwarded me quotes for string quartets and professional photographers. I filed every single message into a separate folder on my phone. I was gathering evidence. Every demand for money and every entitled request was documentation of a relationship that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with extortion. I went to work every day drafting boundaries for strangers while slowly designing the ultimate boundary for myself. My parents wanted me to fund a public spectacle to prove their worth. I decided I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would just change the ending. I let them pick out their expensive clothes. I let my father tell his golf buddies about the grand gesture his daughter was planning. I let my mother order custom napkins with their initials embossed in gold. I watched them build their perfect stage. I knew they were planning to stand on that stage and take credit for my success. They believed they owned my achievements because they provided a roof over my head 2 decades ago. One evening, I sat in my apartment looking at the messages pouring in. My mother sent a photo of Duke the dog. He was sitting on a velvet cushion. The caption said, "Duke is getting fitted for his tuxedo collar today." I stared at the photo of the dog who had received more parental affection than I ever did. The ledger was closed. I set my phone down and started drafting the legal documents that would set me free. I remember the exact temperature of my apartment on my 22nd birthday. It was late October in Chicago, and the radiator in my studio hissed a steady metallic rhythm against the chill. I was in my first year of law school, drowning in civil procedure textbooks and highlighter ink. My desk was pushed against a single frosted window overlooking a brick alleyway. I sat there for 14 hours straight, studying case law, while keeping my phone positioned face up near my left hand. The screen remained dark. Toxic parenting trains you to become an expert at making excuses for the people hurting you. Throughout the morning, I told myself Carol and Richard were busy. My father ran a boutique wealth management firm, or at least that was the title printed on his heavy cardstock business cards. My mother managed a charity gala circuit that required constant luncheons and fittings. I reasoned that they simply lost track of the date. By late afternoon, I downgraded my expectations from a phone call to a simple text message. By evening, I just hoped for an automated email containing a digital gift card. When the digital clock on my microwave shifted to 10 at night, the silence hardened into a physical wait. I closed my textbook and finally picked up my phone. I opened a social media app out of pure habit, seeking some mindless distraction before going to sleep. Instead, the algorithm pushed a live broadcast directly to the top of my feed. The account belonged to my mother. The video thumbnail showed a bright, pristine lakeside pavilion draped in festive banners. I tapped the screen, and the audio filled my quiet apartment. There was music playing in the background, mingling with the sound of wealthy suburbanites laughing and clinking glasses. The camera panned across a folding table covered in imported cheeses and cured meats. Then my mother flipped the lens to frame herself. She wore a tailored cashmere sweater and a bright, practiced smile. "Welcome, everyone, to the event of the season," Carol sang to the camera. "We are here to celebrate our perfect boy. He brings so much joy to this family, and we wanted to honor him the right way." She stepped aside, and the camera focused on the guest of honor. It was Duke, our golden retriever. He sat on a plush velvet cushion in the center of the pavilion, wearing a miniature party hat strapped under his chin. Around him sat half a dozen other neighborhood dogs belonging to my parents' country club friends. Each dog wore a matching custom hat. The centerpiece of the video was brought out by a hired caterer in a white apron. It was a 3-tiered cake crafted entirely from liver paste sweet potatoes and organic frosting. I watched the screen as my father Richard leaned in and lit a sparkler on top of the meat cake. The crowd of 50 guests cheered. Carol narrated the entire sequence, emphasizing that the cake alone cost $500 and the pavilion rental was a steal at $1,000. She boasted about the organic ingredients and the custom party favors she ordered for the guests. I sat in my freezing apartment staring at the glowing screen. The arithmetic of my childhood laid itself out in stark, undeniable numbers. My parents spent over $1,500 and weeks of meticulous planning to throw a birthday party for a dog. They gathered their entire social circle to sing to a pet. Meanwhile, my own 22nd birthday warranted $0, 0 planning, and 0 words. If this were a movie, the main character would throw her phone against the brick wall. She would cry until her eyes swelled shut and scream about the injustice of it all. I did not shed a single tear. Law school was teaching me how to dissect contracts and identify breaches of duty. Sitting at that cheap desk, I applied the same clinical logic to my own bloodline. The pain morphed into a clarifying, icy realization. A heavy boulder settled in my chest, but it was not made of grief. It was made of factual acceptance. I was not loved, because love requires seeing a person as an equal human being. In the Mitchell household, I was categorized. I belonged to a specific column in their ledger. Duke the Golden Retriever existed in the asset column. He was photogenic. He never asked difficult questions. He provided a perfect prop for Carol to project her image of a nurturing, wealthy matriarch. He generated social capital. I, on the other hand, existed in the liability column. I was an independent adult charting a demanding career path. I saw through their superficial performances. I did not boost their country club status because I preferred studying in a quiet room over attending their hollow dinner parties. I was no longer useful to their narrative, so I was discarded. That night, I stopped waiting for the phone to ring. I turned off the screen and went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the daughter who craved her parents' affection was gone. In her place was a budding mediator who viewed Carol and Richard solely as subjects of observation. I stopped seeking their validation. I stopped sending them updates about my grades or my career milestones. I mirrored their exact level of investment, which was nothing. For years, this strategy worked flawlessly. I graduated law school, passed the bar, and built my mediation practice downtown. I maintained a polite, sterile distance. I saw them twice a year at obligatory holiday dinners where we discussed the weather and the stock market. I treated them like difficult clients. They seemed perfectly content with the arrangement, right up until their own financial foundation began to rot. The shift happened quietly. People who live beyond their means rarely announce their downfall. They bleed out in slow, subtle increments. My training as a mediator taught me to watch for micro-expressions and inconsistencies. I began noticing the frayed edges of their curated Illinois lifestyle roughly 6 months before the anniversary gala planning started. It began at a rare Sunday lunch they insisted I attend. They chose an expensive French bistro downtown. Richard wore a designer suit that looked a few seasons old. Carol carried a handbag she purchased 5 years prior. When the waiter brought the check, Richard pulled a premium metal credit card from his leather wallet and dropped it on the silver tray with a theatrical flourish. 10 minutes later, the waiter returned. He leaned down and whispered a quiet apology, stating the card had been declined. Richard flushed a deep, furious red. He snatched the metal card back and muttered a sharp excuse about a banking error and a frozen account due to suspected fraud. He pulled a standard debit card from the back of his wallet to cover the meal. Carol stared intensely out the window, pretending not to notice the transaction. A declined card is a common occurrence for ordinary people. For Richard Mitchell, it was a structural collapse. He prided himself on limitless credit. That brief moment of panic in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. The wealth was an illusion. The luxury cars and the catered dog parties were funded by phantom money. I did not ask questions. I let him pay the bill, and I walked them to their car. But the gears in my mind were turning. If they were out of money, their sudden renewed interest in my life made terrifying sense. I was no longer a liability in their ledger. My thriving mediation practice, my pristine credit score, and my liquid savings had suddenly moved me into the asset column. The confirmation of this silent threat did not come from my parents. It came from the only person in our extended family who possessed a shred of genuine intuition. 2 days after that lunch at the French bistro, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed the name of my sister-in-law, Nia. She is a sharp, perceptive woman married to my older brother, David. David was the golden child, the son who could do no wrong, the heir apparent to Richard's hollow empire. Nia tolerated the family dynamics with a polite smile, but she never drank the poison. Nia never called me during the workday, unless it was an emergency. I stepped out of a conference room and answered the call. Her voice was low and hushed, as if she were hiding in a closet. She bypassed the standard greetings and delivered a warning that changed the entire trajectory of my life. She told me to lock down my credit and refuse any requests for signatures. The facade was not just cracking, it was already in pieces, and they were actively searching for someone to hold the debris. I stood inside the glass-walled conference room of my downtown firm overlooking the Chicago River. The phone pressed against my ear felt heavy. Nia did not typically call during business hours. We shared a polite, functional relationship born from surviving the same toxic ecosystem. She was married to my older brother, David. David was the golden child, raised on a steady diet of unearned praise and financial insulation. He believed our father's wealth management firm was a pillar of the Illinois economy. Nia, on the other hand, was an architect. Her entire profession centered on identifying stress fractures and understanding load-bearing walls. She spent her days drafting structural blueprints. It took her less than 3 years of marriage to realize the Mitchell family foundation was sinking into mud. "Are you in a secure room?" Nia asked. Her voice lacked its usual polished cadence. It sounded tight and urgent. I reached out and twisted the plastic wand on the window blinds, snapping the gray slats shut. "I am alone," I replied. "Tell me what is happening." "Richard and Carol are out of money, Zoe." Nia let the sentence hang in the sterile air of my office. Not just cash poor, they are suffocating in toxic debt. I leaned my hip against the edge of the mahogany conference table. The memory of the declined credit card at the French bistro flashed in my mind, the sudden redness creeping up my father's neck, the way my mother stared out the window, refusing to acknowledge the plastic rectangles swapped on the silver tray. I told Nia about the lunch incident. "That was just a tremor," Nia said. "The earthquake is already happening." Richard lost 3 of his biggest clients last quarter. His firm is a ghost ship. To keep up appearances at the country club, they have been pulling equity out of the Lake Forest house for years. They have a primary mortgage they can barely service and a secondary line of credit that is tapped to the limit. I process the information with the clinical detachment I usually reserved for high-stakes asset division. My parents projected an image of flawless prosperity. They leased new luxury sedans every 36 months. They hosted charity galas. They fed organic imported liver paste to a golden retriever. To learn that this entire aesthetic was funded by predatory lending did not make me feel sympathetic. It made me realize how dangerous they truly were. People obsessed with preserving their social status will cannibalize their own young to avoid public embarrassment. "Why are you calling me today?" I asked. "If they are going bankrupt, they will eventually have to downsize. It is a math problem." "Because they refuse to downsize," Nia whispered. "David is blind to it. He thinks his father is experiencing a temporary cash flow issue. But I saw the mail, Zoe. I check the home office when they invite us over for Sunday dinners. The country club dues are 6 months in arrears. They are dodging phone calls from collection agencies. And the reason I am calling you right now is because they have found a solution to their math problem." My stomach tightened. I watched a barge drift slowly down the green water of the Chicago River far below my window. "Who is the solution?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "You are," Nia said flatly. She explained that she had walked into the kitchen earlier that morning unannounced. Richard and Carol were sitting at the granite island, sharing a pot of coffee and reviewing a yellow legal pad. They did not hear her approach. Nia stood in the hallway and listened to them dissect my career. They had pulled public records regarding the average compensation structure for senior mediators in Cook County. They were discussing my credit score. They knew I drove a sensible used car and rented a modest apartment. Instead of viewing my financial discipline as an accomplishment, they viewed it as a surplus they were entitled to harvest. "They are grooming you," Nia warned. "They know you have pristine credit and liquid savings. This sudden interest they have taken in your life over the past few months is not guilt. It is a calculated assessment of your net worth. They are planning to use this upcoming 40th anniversary gala as a smokescreen. They want to project extreme wealth to their social circle while quietly cornering you into funding the event and eventually bailing out their mortgages." I took a slow, deep breath. The air in the conference room felt thin. For 22 years, my primary emotional struggle revolved around being ignored. I was the forgotten daughter, relegated to the background, while my brother received the accolades and the family dog received the catered birthday parties. That neglect left a deep, hollow ache in my chest. But this new reality was far more sinister. Neglect is passive. What Nia described was active, predatory targeting. I was no longer a liability sitting quietly in the discarded column of their ledger. I had been reassigned. I was now an unexploited asset. They were actively hunting my resources. Nia heard my silence and filled the space. I snapped a picture of the legal pad before they realized I was in the house, she said. "I am sending it to your personal email right now. Do not reply to the email. Just look at it and understand what you are dealing with." My phone chimed with an incoming notification. I pulled the device away from my ear and opened the secure email application. The screen loaded a high-resolution photograph of Richard's handwriting on lined yellow paper. The top of the page was titled Alternative Liquidity Strategies. Below that was a list of high-interest loan providers and hard money lenders. Several options were crossed out with aggressive strokes of blue ink. At the very bottom of the page, my name was written in capital letters, Zoe Mitchell. Next to my name, Richard had drawn a dash followed by the phrase, primary guarantor. He had circled my name twice. The cold precision I relied upon in the courtroom settled over my entire nervous system. The heavy boulder of factual acceptance I swallowed on my 22nd birthday crystallized into sharp defensive armor. My parents did not view me as a human being. I was a financial backstop. They were willing to chain me to their sinking ship to guarantee they could keep drinking imported champagne on the deck. Nia spoke again, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "David is clueless. He thinks family is supposed to stick together no matter what. If they ask him to sign anything, he will do it blindly. I am locking down our joint accounts today. You need to do the same, Zoe. Put a freeze on your Social Security number. Do not co-sign a car lease. Do not pay a utility bill. Do not give them a single inch of access to your identity. I will handle it," I promised. My voice was steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding my veins. "Thank you, Nia. You took a significant risk telling me this. You are the only one in this bloodline who earned her own way out," Nia replied. I am not going to sit quietly and watch them drag you back into the swamp. Keep your guard up. The requests for money are going to start small. They will test your boundaries before they drop the hammer." She ended the call. I lowered the phone and stared at the dark screen. The landscape of my family dynamic had shifted from a sad domestic drama into a high-stakes legal thriller. I spent my professional life advising clients on how to protect their assets from vindictive spouses and greedy business partners. Now I had to apply those exact defensive strategies against the people who shared my DNA. I walked back to my desk and initiated a comprehensive freeze on my credit profile across all 3 major bureaus. I enabled 2-factor authentication on every financial account under my name. I treated my own parents with the same extreme caution I would apply to a known identity thief. Less than 2 hours after I secured my digital perimeter, my phone vibrated against the wood grain of my desk. A new text message illuminated the screen. It was from Carol. The timing was impeccable. The message read, "Hi, darling. Your father and I miss you terribly. We know you are so busy with your important cases, but we would love to take you out for a nice family dinner this Thursday. Just the 3 of us catching up. Our treat. Let me know if that works." I stared at the glowing pixels. Prior to Nia's warning, I might have read that text and felt a tiny, pathetic flicker of hope. A small part of my inner child might have believed they genuinely missed my company. That version of Zoe was dead. The new version of Zoe saw the text for exactly what it was. It was a reconnaissance mission, the opening move in an extortion play. They were initiating the grooming process Nia warned me about. They wanted to sit across a table from me, pour wine, and soften the ground before planting their demands. They were laying a trap wrapped in the guise of maternal affection. In mediation, avoiding the negotiation table entirely is a sign of weakness. If you want to defeat an opponent, you have to sit across from them and let them reveal their strategy. You have to gather your own evidence. I unlocked my phone and drafted a brief professional response. "Thursday works well. Send me the location." I hit send and set the device aside. I was not going to a family dinner. I was walking into a deposition. I needed to extract undeniable proof of their transactional nature. I needed documentation showing a judge exactly how they viewed our relationship. I had no idea that Carol was about to hand me that exact piece of evidence, written in her own blue ink on the back of a restaurant receipt. 4 weeks after the dinner, where I paid my own mother for a restaurant meal, I received a thick envelope in the mail. It bore the gold-embossed seal of the Illinois Bar Association. Inside was a formal letter notifying me that I had been selected as the Family Law Mediator of the Year. It was a prestigious recognition, usually reserved for attorneys a decade older than me. The award acknowledged a complex, high-profile custody negotiation I navigated earlier that spring. I held the heavy cardstock in my hands and felt a rare, genuine wave of pride. I earned this milestone through late nights, skipped vacations, and an unwavering dedication to untangling other people's broken lives. The association was hosting a formal gala at a historic hotel in downtown Chicago to present the honors. Honorees received a complimentary table for 8 guests. I filled 6 of those seats with my colleagues and mentors. 2 chairs remained empty. I knew my parents were drowning in hidden debt. I possessed the countersigned receipt proving their transactional nature. Yet a small, stubborn fragment of my psychology decided to administer one final test. I wanted to give them a chance to simply show up. I mailed them a formal, printed invitation to the ceremony. I did not ask for money. I did not ask them to plan anything. All they had to do was wear their expensive clothes, sit at my table, and watch me accept a glass plaque. 3 days later, Carol sent a text message confirming their attendance. She wrote that they were thrilled and would not miss it for the world. The night of the ceremony arrived with a biting November wind coming off the lake. The ballroom was draped in dark velvet and illuminated by crystal chandeliers. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. I wore a simple, elegant black dress I purchased myself. I sat at the head of my assigned table, flanked by the people who actually supported my career. To my right sat Vivian Cole. Vivian was a formidable African-American senior mediator and a former family court judge. She served as my primary mentor since my first day at the firm. Vivian was a woman who commanded respect without ever raising her voice. She wore sharp, tailored suits and drank her coffee black. She possessed a terrifying intellect combined with a deep well of authentic empathy. When I turned 23, Vivian was the only person on earth who remembered my birthday. She bought me a paper cup of coffee and a warm pastry and placed them on my desk without demanding a parade in return. She represented everything a mother should be. The dinner service began. The waiters poured wine and distributed plates of roasted chicken and seasonal vegetables. At my table, 2 place settings remained untouched. The pristine white napkins were still folded into crisp geometric shapes. The water goblets gathered condensation. I checked my watch. The opening speeches were starting. Richard and Carol were not just running late, they were absent. A familiar, icy calm washed over my nervous system. I reached into my evening bag and pulled out my phone. I kept the screen dimmed below the edge of the tablecloth. I did not bother checking for text messages or missed calls. People who abandon their children rarely offer the courtesy of an excuse. Instead, I opened my social media application. The algorithm delivered the answer instantly. My mother's profile displayed a glowing circle indicating an active live broadcast. I tapped the screen and muted the volume. The video showed a brightly lit, pristine room lined with white subway tiles. It was a luxury canine hydrotherapy spa located in their wealthy suburb. In the center of the room sat a heated indoor pool. Duke, the golden retriever, was wearing a specialized flotation vest. A certified canine physical therapist was gently guiding the dog through the warm water. Carol narrated the broadcast. I read the automated captions scrolling across the bottom of the screen. Duke had a very stressful week, she explained to her viewers. The poor boy seemed lethargic, so we booked a private evening session to soothe his joints. Nothing is too good for our perfect angel. I stared at the screen. The broadcast was happening live. At the exact moment I was sitting in a Chicago ballroom waiting to receive the highest professional honor of my life, my parents were 30 miles away watching a dog paddle in a heated pool. They abandoned my career-defining milestone because their pet appeared tired. I locked my phone and placed it back into my evening bag. I looked at the 2 empty chairs. The test was over. They failed, and the failure was permanent. Vivian noticed the shift in my posture. She did not ask intrusive questions. She simply reached over and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was firm and grounding. She leaned in and spoke in a low, steady voice. "The people who matter are already sitting at this table, Zoe," she said. 10 minutes later, my name was called over the sound system. I walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage. The spotlight blinded me for a fraction of a second. The president of the association handed me a heavy crystal award. I stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Vivian standing up in the front row, clapping with genuine, fierce pride. I delivered a brief professional speech thanking my mentors and my firm. I did not mention my family. I did not dedicate the honor to the parents who provided a roof over my head. I walked off that stage knowing my bloodline meant nothing. Chosen family meant everything. The morning after the gala, I woke up early. The crystal plaque sat on my kitchen counter, catching the morning light. Next to it sat my wallet containing the folded restaurant receipt. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at my kitchen island. My parents' abandonment at the awards ceremony severed the last lingering emotional thread I carried. I was entirely free of guilt. This liberation allowed me to view my situation through a strictly legal lens. Nia warned me they were hunting my resources. The empty chairs proved they had zero emotional attachment to me. Combine those 2 facts, and the resulting equation was dangerous. They viewed me as an unexploited asset, and they were drowning in debt. Desperate people do not ask for permission. They take. I opened my laptop. I decided to conduct a forensic audit of my own life. If they were planning to use me as a financial shield, I needed to ensure my perimeter was impenetrable. I already froze my credit profiles, but I wanted to verify the integrity of my past records. I logged into a secure public records database used by law firms to trace hidden assets during divorce proceedings. I entered my own Social Security number and my full legal name. I expected to see my modest apartment lease, my student loan history, and my current vehicle registration. The progress bar filled the screen. The search results populated in a neat chronological list. I scrolled down past my known accounts. Near the bottom of the page, an unfamiliar entry caught my eye. It was a secondary mortgage attached to a commercial property deed. The property was located in a neighboring county. I clicked the hyperlink to expand the file. The document indicated a substantial line of credit drawn against a newly formed limited liability company. The name of the company was Z. Mitchell Holdings. My lungs stopped working. The air in my kitchen turned to ice. I downloaded the full PDF of the deed and the loan origination documents. I read through the dense legal jargon with terrifying speed. Someone had formed an LLC using my name and my identifying information. They used this fraudulent entity to secure a six-figure line of credit, pledging the commercial property as collateral. The primary guarantor listed on the loan was Zoe Mitchell. My eyes scanned the digital signatures on the final page. My signature was forged. It was a crude approximation of my handwriting, lacking the sharp angles I naturally produced. I scrolled down to the notary section. Every legal property transfer requires a licensed notary public to verify the identity of the signatories. The state seal was stamped clearly on the digital scan. Beneath the seal was the printed name of the notary who authorized the fraudulent transaction: David Mitchell, my older brother, the golden child. The pieces snapped together with a sickening crunch. David was not just a clueless bystander losing his own money in bad investments. He was an active participant in a felony. My parents needed cash to maintain their country club facade. They lacked the credit to secure it themselves, so they drafted the paperwork, forged my signature, and used David to notarize the theft. The entire biological family was complicit in stealing my identity to fund their lifestyle. This was no longer a sad story about a neglected daughter. It was a coordinated financial crime. I printed the documents. The printer whirred and spat out the pages detailing my ruin. If the bank called that loan, I would be held legally responsible for a six-figure debt. My mediation license could be suspended. My career would be destroyed. I gathered the warm papers and placed them into a manila folder alongside the restaurant receipt. I needed a strategy that offered more than just a defense. I needed an offensive strike that would sever my legal ties to these people forever, while simultaneously freezing their assets. There was only one person in Illinois who possessed the authority and the ruthlessness to help me execute a plan of that magnitude. I picked up my phone and dialed Vivian Cole. She answered on the second ring. "Vivian, I need to see you at your house this evening," I said. "I need to hire you as my attorney." The game was over. I was going to war. I parked my sensible sedan in Vivian Cole's driveway. Her home in Evanston stood in sharp contrast to the sprawling, sterile estates my parents favored. It was a sturdy brick craftsman surrounded by ancient oak trees. The porch light cast a warm yellow glow against the damp evening chill. I walked up the wooden steps, clutching the manila folder against my chest. Vivian opened the door before I could knock. She wore a thick woven cardigan over her silk blouse. She took one look at my face and stepped aside, letting me into a foyer that smelled of roasted garlic and old bound books. It smelled like a real home. We walked into her kitchen and sat at a worn farmhouse table. She poured 2 mugs of black coffee and slid one across the smooth wood toward my hands. The heat radiating from the ceramic mug triggered a visceral memory. It pulled me backward to the morning of my 23rd birthday. I was a junior clerk at the firm, exhausted from researching precedents in a windowless cubicle. My biological parents had ignored my milestone for the second year in a row. I was bracing myself for another silent evening. Then Vivian walked past my desk. She did not make a grand spectacle. She simply set a steaming paper cup of coffee and a fresh pastry next to my keyboard. She looked down at me and said, "Happy birthday, counselor." She recognized me. She treated me with a quiet dignity my own mother never bothered to offer. That small gesture anchored my soul. I pulled my mind back to the present and opened the manila folder. I slid the downloaded property deed and the forged loan origination documents across the farmhouse table. I watched Vivian's eyes scan the dense paragraphs. She had spent 15 years as a family court judge before transitioning to private mediation. Her face remained a neutral mask, but her jaw locked tight as she reached the final page. She stared at the crude imitation of my signature and the state notary stamp bearing my brother David's name. "This is not a simple boundary violation, Zoe," she said. Her voice carried the weight of a gavel striking a wooden block. "This is felony fraud. They stole your identity to secure a 6-figure commercial loan. If that LLC defaults, the creditors will drain your accounts and garnish your wages." "I know," I replied. "I need to sever my legal connection to them. I want to build a firewall they can never breach." Vivian folded her hands over the documents. "If you go to the police right now, Richard and Carol will hire a defense attorney. They will drag this out in civil court and claim you gave them verbal authorization. They will use their remaining social capital to paint you as a vindictive daughter. We need a strategy that executes a permanent legal separation while simultaneously freezing their assets before they realize the trap is sprung." She stood up and walked over to her kitchen counter. She outlined a 2-part offensive strike. The first component involved a profound piece of Illinois state legislation. It was the adult adoption process. In the eyes of the law, an adult can be formally adopted by another consenting adult. The moment a judge signs that decree, your original birth certificate is sealed. All previous biological rights, obligations, and inheritance claims are eradicated. You become a legal stranger to Richard and Carol. They would hold no standing to challenge your decisions or claim any future dependency. Vivian turned around and leaned against the granite counter. Her dark eyes held an unwavering, fierce loyalty. "My husband and I never had children," she said softly. "We would consider it the highest honor to file that petition and adopt you, Zoe." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I nodded, accepting the lifeline she offered. The legal epiphany settled over me, replacing my anxiety with a cold, tactical focus. We agreed to file the adoption paperwork in secret. Once the judge stamped the decree, we would serve my biological parents with a formal notice of fraud investigation regarding the forged commercial loan. We would drop the guillotine on the exact day they expected me to hand them the world. The next morning, I sat at my office desk, drafting the preliminary adoption petition. My focus shattered when my office door swung open without a knock. My older brother David barged into the room. He looked terrible. His usual tailored suits were replaced by a wrinkled dress shirt. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the crisp autumn air circulating through the building. He closed the door behind him and paced across the carpet. "We have a serious problem, Zoe," he announced. I slid the adoption paperwork into a desk drawer and locked it. I looked at the man who notarized the theft of my identity. He played the role of the innocent golden child flawlessly. I reached under my desk and pressed a sequence of buttons on my smartphone, launching a hidden voice recording application. "What is the problem, David?" I asked, maintaining a calm, professional tone. "It is the 40th anniversary gala," he said. He stopped pacing and gripped the back of a leather visitor chair. "Carol booked the venue, but the management company is demanding the $10,000 catering deposit by Friday. Richard is tapped out. His firm took a huge hit last quarter, and their liquid cash is tied up in investments. They need you to cover the deposit." I stared at him, letting the silence stretch. I knew their liquid cash was not tied up in investments. It was vaporized by toxic debt. I also knew he was lying to protect his own skin. "Why are you delivering this message?" I asked. "Why didn't Carol call me?" "Because she is too proud to beg," he lied, running a trembling hand through his hair. "Family takes care of family, Zoe. You have a thriving practice. You do not have a mortgage. You owe them for everything they gave us growing up. If you do not write that check, the venue will cancel the reservation, and the parents will be humiliated in front of their entire social circle." I leaned back in my chair. He was desperate. I needed him to incriminate himself on the digital recording. I needed proof of their financial ruin spoken in his own voice. $10,000 is a significant amount of cash, David, I said evenly. If Richard is merely experiencing a temporary cash flow issue, why can't he secure a short-term bridge loan? He has excellent credit. David let out a harsh, bitter laugh. No, he doesn't. He maxed out his secondary lines of credit months ago. The banks are circling them like vultures. If this gala falls apart, their friends will start asking questions. Their investors will pull out. The whole house of cards collapses. You have to write the check, Zoe, to keep the family whole. The recorder captured every single word. He admitted the bankruptcy. He confirmed the predatory desperation driving their actions. I looked at my brother feeling nothing but a sterile, clinical detachment. He wanted me to empty my savings to fund a vanity project for the very people who forged my signature on a commercial deed. I will not write a check for the catering deposit, David, I said. My voice offered zero room for negotiation. My finances are my own. You and Richard will have to find another solution. David's face twisted into a mask of genuine panic. He stepped toward my desk, pointing an accusing finger at my chest. You are going to regret this, he hissed. When they lose everything, it will be your fault. He turned and stormed out of the office, slamming the heavy wooden door behind him. The glass partitions rattled. I reached under my desk and saved the audio file to a secure cloud server. I now possessed the restaurant invoice, proving their transactional nature, the forged property deed proving their criminality, and a recorded confession detailing their imminent bankruptcy. The trap was nearly complete. But I knew Carol would not accept defeat gracefully. If David failed to extract the funds, she would escalate her tactics. She would attempt to force my hand using the only leverage she believed she still possessed. I waited for her next move, knowing she was about to weave the final thread into her own snare. The silence in my office felt different after David slammed the door. It was the silence of a breached perimeter. My brother had just stood on my carpet and demanded $10,000 to save our parents from public ruin. He claimed it was a temporary cash flow problem. My instincts as a mediator screamed that he was hiding a much darker truth. Desperation of that magnitude does not stem from a simple unpaid country club bill. It stems from a structural collapse. I locked my office door and drew the blinds. I sat back down at my desk and woke up my computer monitors. It was time to stop relying on secondhand warnings from my sister-in-law. It was time to run a full forensic audit on my own legal standing. I opened a secure public records database. This tool is typically reserved for high-conflict divorce cases where spouses attempt to conceal assets in offshore accounts or shell companies. I typed my own Social Security number into the search bar. I entered my full legal name. I adjusted the search parameters to encompass the entire state of Illinois and the surrounding jurisdictions. I pressed the Enter key and waited while the algorithm scrubbed decades of property deeds, credit inquiries, and civil dockets. The screen populated with a chronological list of my financial history. The top entries were expected: my law school loans, my apartment lease in downtown Chicago, my vehicle registration. I scrolled past the mundane records, scanning for anomalies. Near the bottom of the first page, my eyes snagged on a recent filing. It was an incorporation document for a limited liability company. The entity was named Z. Mitchell Holdings. It was registered at an address I did not recognize in a neighboring county. The filing date was precisely 7 months ago. My mind aligned the dates. 7 months ago was the exact moment Carol and Richard began texting me out of the blue. It was the exact time frame when they invited me to the expensive French bistro where my father's credit card was declined. Their sudden interest in my life was not the beginning of their grooming process. The grooming was merely a distraction. The crime had already been committed. They were trying to keep me close so they could monitor my mail and gauge my suspicion. I clicked the hyperlink to open the full dossier on the shell company. The entity was used as a vessel to purchase a commercial warehouse. Immediately after the purchase, the holding company leveraged the property to secure a substantial secondary line of credit. The principal amount was $450,000. I pulled up the loan origination agreement. I needed to see who signed the promissory note. The digital scan of the final page loaded onto my screen. There, on the signature line, was my name. I leaned closer to the monitor. The signature was an imitation. It mimicked the general loops of my handwriting, but it lacked the sharp, fluid pressure I applied to the letter Z. Someone had practiced my signature and executed it on a binding legal contract. They pledged my future earnings and my pristine credit score as collateral for nearly $500,000. If this loan went into default, the bank would not care about my mediation practice. They would garnish my wages and seize my savings. Every real estate transfer requires verification. A licensed notary public must witness the signature and apply their official state seal to authenticate the identity of the signer. I scrolled down to the bottom corner of the document. The circular emblem of the state of Illinois was stamped in blue ink. Beneath the seal was the printed name and registration number of the notary. The name read David Mitchell. My lungs felt tight. The air in my office turned stale. David did not just turn a blind eye to his parents' financial ruin. He was the architect of their fraudulent survival. He used his state-issued notary license to validate the theft of my identity. He stood in a room with Richard and Carol and watched them forge my name. Then he stamped the paper and made it legal. I needed to understand why the Golden Child would risk a felony conviction. I opened a new search tab and ran a background check on David. He worked as an independent investment broker. He always boasted about his high-yield portfolios during our holiday dinners. I navigated to the civil court dockets for Cook County. The search results returned a staggering list of pending litigation. Former clients were suing David for gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He had traded on margin and lost hundreds of thousands of dollars belonging to angry investors. He was facing disbarment from the Financial Regulatory Authority and imminent civil judgments. The architecture of my family dynamic was laid bare on the glowing screen. David was drowning in his own catastrophic failures. He went to Richard and Carol for a bailout. They did not have the cash because their own wealth was an illusion. They needed an immense influx of capital to pay off David's angry clients and keep their perfect son out of a courtroom. They looked at their ledger. They saw me, the daughter they ignored for 22 years. They decided my life was an acceptable sacrifice to save his. They stole my identity to secure the commercial loan, funneled the cash to David to quiet his lawsuits, and left me holding the bomb. A normal person might collapse under the weight of that betrayal. I felt a profound, icy clarity. The transactional nature of my childhood was merely a warm-up for this exact moment. They did not just fail to love me. They actively plotted my ruin. This was no longer a matter of setting emotional boundaries. It was a matter of strict legal survival. If I confronted them without a flawless defensive perimeter, they would deny everything and destroy the evidence. I needed to move with flawless precision. I activated my office printer. I downloaded every single document: the incorporation papers for the holding company, the forged promissory note, the digital copy of David's notary stamp, the pending civil lawsuits filed against my brother. The machine hummed and pushed out page after page of undeniable proof. I gathered the warm sheets of paper and placed them inside a thick leather binder. This binder was no longer just a collection of grievances. It was the weapon I would use to dismantle their lives. I placed the binder into my briefcase. I knew exactly who I needed to see. Vivian Cole possessed the judicial experience and the tactical ruthlessness required to navigate a familial fraud of this magnitude. I needed her to help me orchestrate a permanent legal exit. But executing that exit required time. The county courts moved slowly, and I needed to keep my family distracted while the paperwork was processed. I needed them to believe they were still in control of the board. I packed my briefcase and unlocked my office door. As I walked toward the elevator, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an email notification from the event manager at the country club. The subject line read, "Urgent, signature required for anniversary gala contract." I opened the message. The event manager explained that Carol had submitted the final vendor agreements for the catering and the floral arrangements. My mother had instructed the venue to transfer all financial liability for the event directly into my name. She had provided them with my personal email address and my electronic billing information. The grooming was over. The extortion phase had officially begun. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby, preparing to outplay them at their own game. I navigated my car northbound along Lakeshore Drive, watching the gray waters of Lake Michigan churn against the concrete barriers. The heater hummed, combating the bitter Chicago wind, but the real chill resided in the leather binder resting on my passenger seat. I was driving toward Evanston, to the home of Vivian Cole. Vivian served as my primary mentor since my first day at the mediation firm. Before entering private practice, she spent 15 years presiding over a family court docket. She possessed a terrifying intellect, tempered by an authentic, unwavering empathy. I pulled into her driveway. Her residence stood in stark contrast to the sprawling, sterile monuments my parents occupied in Lake Forest. Vivian's home was a sturdy, brick craftsman surrounded by ancient oaks. The porch light cast a welcoming yellow glow. I walked up the wooden steps and knocked. Her husband Thomas opened the door. He was a retired architecture professor with kind eyes and a steady demeanor. He took one look at my rigid posture and stepped aside, ushering me into a foyer that smelled of roasted garlic and old-bound books. It smelled like a genuine sanctuary. He guided me into the kitchen where Vivian sat reviewing case files at a worn farmhouse table. She looked up, her dark eyes registering the tension in my jaw. She closed her folders and gestured to the empty chair across from her. Thomas poured a mug of dark roast coffee and slid the ceramic cup across the smooth wood toward my hands. The sudden radiating heat pressing against my palms triggered a visceral memory. It pulled me backward through time, landing squarely on the morning of my 23rd birthday. I was a junior clerk at the firm, exhausted from researching precedents in a windowless cubicle. My biological parents had ignored my milestone for the second year in a row. I sat at my desk, bracing myself for another silent evening, pretending the calendar date held no significance. Then Vivian walked past my cubicle. She did not make a grand spectacle. She did not demand an audience. She simply set a steaming paper cup of coffee and a fresh vanilla bean pastry next to my keyboard. She looked down at me and said, "Happy birthday, counselor." She recognized me. She treated me with a quiet dignity my own mother never bothered to offer. That small gesture anchored my soul. It taught me that care did not require a ledger or a calculated return on investment. I pulled my mind back to the present and unclasped the leather binder. I slid the downloaded property deed, the incorporation papers for the shell company, and the forged loan origination documents across the farmhouse table. I watched Vivian's eyes scan the dense paragraphs. Her face remained a neutral mask, but her posture shifted. She transitioned instantly from a comforting mentor into a presiding judge. She stared at the crude imitation of my signature and the state notary stamp bearing my brother David's name. Thomas stood behind her chair reading over her shoulder. The silence in the kitchen grew heavy. "This is not a simple boundary violation," Zoe Vivian said. Her voice carried the unmistakable weight of a gavel striking a wooden block. "This is felony identity theft. They utilized your pristine credit to secure a 6-figure commercial loan. If that entity defaults, the creditors will bypass Richard and Carol entirely. They will drain your accounts, garnish your wages, and jeopardize your legal license." "I know," I replied, keeping my voice level. "They view me as a shield. If I go to the police right now, Richard will hire a defense attorney. He will drag this out in civil court and claim I gave him verbal authorization to act as my proxy. He will use his remaining social capital to paint me as a vindictive daughter trying to ruin his firm. I need a strategy that executes a permanent legal separation while simultaneously freezing their assets before they realize the trap is sprung." Vivian folded her hands over the forged documents. She looked at Thomas, who gave a slow, affirming nod. She turned her attention back to me. "We need a 2-pronged offensive strike," she explained. The first component involves a profound piece of Illinois state legislation. We are going to utilize the adult adoption process. I blinked, processing the term. I understood the mechanics of minor adoptions, but adult petitions were rare in my specific mediation circles. In the eyes of the law, Vivian continued, an adult can be formally adopted by another consenting adult. The moment a judge signs that decree, your original birth certificate is sealed and amended. All previous biological rights, obligations, and inheritance claims are eradicated. You become a legal stranger to Richard and Carol. They would hold zero standing to challenge your medical decisions, claim any future dependency, or utilize your familial status for financial leverage. She leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. To break a toxic family, you do not just walk away. You legally replace them. The brilliance of the strategy illuminated the dark corners of my anxiety. It was the ultimate boundary. A restraining order merely tells someone to stay away. An adoption decree tells the world they never existed. But who would petition the court, I asked. The statute requires the adopting parties to file the paperwork and stand before the judge. Thomas placed his hand gently on Vivian's shoulder. Vivian looked at me with an unwavering, fierce loyalty. My husband and I never had children, she said softly. We have watched you build a brilliant career out of sheer grit. We have watched you carry the weight of people who do not deserve you. We would consider it the highest honor to file that petition and adopt you, Zoe. A sudden, sharp pressure built behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. For 29 years, I audited my own behavior, trying to earn a seat at a table that was never meant for me. Now, sitting in a warm kitchen in Evanston, I was being offered a seat without an invoice attached. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I accepted the lifeline they offered. The legal epiphany settled over my nervous system, replacing my residual grief with a cold, tactical focus. We outlined the timeline. We agreed to file the adoption paperwork in secret, coordinating with a trusted judge Vivian knew from her tenure on the bench. Once the judge stamps the decree, we initiate prong 2, Vivian said, tapping the forged promissory note. We serve your biological parents and your brother with a formal notice of fraud investigation. We freeze the holding company assets and alert the lending institution to the forgery. But timing is critical. We must drop the guillotine on the exact day they feel untouchable. The 40th anniversary gala, I said. The words tasted like steel. They are planning to use that party to project extreme wealth. They are trying to secure new investors to bail out their sinking firm. If we serve them at the country club, we destroy their social facade and their financial escape route in the same breath. It is poetic justice, Thomas noted, collecting the coffee mugs. But you have to maintain your cover until the trap snaps shut. You have to play the role of the compliant daughter. My phone vibrated inside my coat pocket, serving as a harsh reminder of the ticking clock. I pulled it out and opened the email from the country club event manager. I showed the screen to Vivian. Carol just instructed the venue to transfer all financial liability for the anniversary party directly into my name, I explained. She gave them my personal email and my electronic billing information. The venue is demanding a digital signature to lock in the $10,000 catering deposit by Friday. Vivian read the email, her expression tightening. She is attempting to establish a paper trail of financial responsibility. If you sign that contract, you validate her claim that you are funding their lifestyle. It weakens our fraud case. I cannot sign it, I agreed. But if I cancel the reservation, Carol will know I am onto her. She will panic, and David will realize the money is not coming to cover his lawsuits. They might attempt to liquidate the commercial property or flee the jurisdiction before we can file the fraud notice. You have to outmaneuver them, Vivian said. You need to untangle your name from that venue contract without alerting Carol that the reservation is in jeopardy. You have to feed their delusion. I looked down at the glowing screen. David had barged into my office hours ago, demanding this same deposit money. The pressure was escalating rapidly. I needed to execute a flawless diversion. I needed to deal with the venue manager, and I needed to handle my golden child brother, who was growing more unstable by the hour. I packed the forged documents back into my leather binder, preparing to step back into the line of fire. Friday morning arrived with a pale gray sky pressing down against the Chicago skyscrapers. The deadline for the country club catering deposit was set for 5 o'clock that evening. If the $10,000 did not clear the venue account, the reservation would be terminated and my parents' social facade would shatter. I drove to my office, anticipating a reaction, but I expected the pressure to come from my mother. I underestimated the sheer desperation of the son who was supposed to carry the family legacy. David Mitchell never learned how to fall because Richard and Carol never allowed him to hit the ground. When we were teenagers, my brother wrecked his brand new sports car driving under the influence. My father made 3 phone calls, hired an expensive defense attorney, and buried the incident beneath a sealed juvenile record. When David failed out of his first university due to chronic truancy, my mother wrote a substantial check to a different college endowment fund, securing his immediate transfer. He was conditioned to believe that rules were flexible suggestions, and consequences were reserved for the lower tax brackets. He walked through life with a dangerous, arrogant buoyancy. That buoyancy evaporated the moment the real world finally demanded payment. As I parked my sedan in the underground garage, I thought about the forged commercial loan sitting in my encrypted digital folder. David used his state-issued notary stamp to authenticate the theft of my identity because his usual safety nets were gone. His angry investors were filing lawsuits. Richard and Carol were drowning in toxic mortgages. The family ATM was empty, and I was the only remaining source of capital. I walked through the revolving glass doors of my law firm and stepped into the lobby. My receptionist, Sarah, was sitting behind the curved marble desk, looking noticeably uncomfortable. Standing near the leather waiting chairs was my brother. David looked awful. His appearance was usually curated with agonizing precision, but today his tailored suit jacket was wrinkled. His tie hung loose around his unbuttoned collar. He needed a shave, and his hands were shoved deep into his trouser pockets. He was shifting his weight from side to side, pacing a tight circle into the expensive carpet. He spotted me and closed the distance before I could even greet my receptionist. "We need to talk right now, Zoe," he said. His voice was a tight, strained whisper. I did not flinch. I nodded to Sarah and gestured toward the glass hallway leading to the private mediator suites. David followed closely behind me. His breathing was shallow and uneven. He stepped inside my office and closed the heavy oak door, shutting out the ambient noise of the firm. I walked over to my desk. I picked up my smartphone and placed my thumb over the screen. Under the guise of silencing my notifications, I launched a hidden voice recording application. I set the phone face up next to my keyboard. The tiny red indicator light blinked, assuring me that every word spoken in this room would be preserved. "Sit down, David," I offered, pointing to the visitor chair. He ignored the chair. He leaned over my desk, planting both palms flat against the polished wood. He stared at me with bloodshot eyes. Sweat beaded along his hairline, catching the fluorescent light. "The venue manager just called, Carol," he began, his words rushing together. "They are going to release the ballroom to another party if the $10,000 is not wired by the end of the business day. Carol is having a nervous breakdown in her kitchen. You have to pay the deposit, Zoe. You have to send the wire right now." I sat back in my leather chair. I looked at the man who helped forge my name on a 6-figure commercial deed. He was begging me to drain my own savings to fund a luxury party for the same people who plotted my financial ruin. The sheer audacity of his request was staggering, but my professional training kept my expression entirely neutral. "I do not have to do anything, David," I replied. My voice was level and slow. I did not sign a contract with the country club. I did not invite 80 people to eat prime rib and drink imported champagne. This is not my debt to settle. "You do not understand," he pleaded, running a shaking hand through his hair. He rounded the edge of the desk, closing the physical distance between us. "Family takes care of family. They provided for you your entire life. They put a roof over your head. You owe them this celebration. If this is a matter of filial duty, why are you not paying the deposit?" I asked. "You are an independent investment broker. You drive a luxury sedan. $10,000 should be a minor expense for a man with your portfolio. Wire the funds yourself and save Carol from her distress. The question struck a nerve. David's jaw clenched. He looked away from me, staring at the framed diplomas hanging on my office wall. The silence stretched thick and heavy. I let it linger. In mediation, silence is a tool used to break a liar. People despise avoiding conversation, and they will inevitably offer damaging truths just to fill the quiet space. "I can't," he finally muttered, his voice cracked. "Why not?" I pressed. I needed his confession on the digital record. I needed him to articulate the bankruptcy. "My accounts are frozen," he admitted, turning back to face me. "The firm is auditing my trades. It is a temporary liquidity issue, but I cannot move any cash right now. And Richard is tapped out." "Tapped out," I repeated, acting surprised. "Dad runs a boutique wealth management firm. They live in a lakefront estate. How can he be unable to cover a simple catering bill?" David leaned closer, lowering his voice to a desperate hiss. "Because it is all gone, Zoe. The firm lost its anchor clients. They have been pulling equity out of the house for 5 years just to pay the country club dues. The banks are closing in. They are dodging collection calls every single day. If this gala falls apart, their friends will start asking questions. Their remaining investors will smell the blood in the water and pull their accounts. The whole house of cards collapses tonight if you do not write that check." The recorder captured the entire admission. He confessed the insolvency. He confirmed the predatory desperation Nia had warned me about. He admitted they were utilizing the anniversary party as a fraudulent smokescreen to deceive their remaining clients. "We need your cash to keep the family whole, Zoe," he begged, his eyes wide with panic. "Just wire the money. I promise Richard will pay you back with interest the moment his firm stabilizes." I looked at my older brother. He was a coward wrapped in an expensive suit. He knew Richard would never pay me back, because Richard was planning to let the commercial property default under my stolen identity. David was standing in my office, trying to extort $10,000 from the sister he had already betrayed to the tune of nearly $500,000. I placed my hands flat on my desk. I locked my eyes onto his. "I will not give you a dime," I stated. David's face dropped. The panic morphed instantly into a dark, ugly rage. His true nature, the spoiled golden child denied his prize, surfaced. "You selfish little brat," he sneered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You sit in your downtown office acting superior while your own parents face ruin. You are going to regret this. When they lose the house and their reputation is dragged through the dirt, I am going to make sure everyone in Lake Forest knows it was your fault. I will make sure every single guest at that country club knows you abandoned your blood." I remained perfectly still. I did not rise to the bait. The threat to my social standing was laughable. I did not care about the opinions of people who threw catered parties for golden retrievers. "You should leave my office, David," I said, pointing toward the door, "before I call building security to escort you out." He stared at me, breathing heavily. He realized the manipulation tactics that worked flawlessly on Richard and Carol held zero power over me. He turned on his heel and stormed out of the room. He slammed the heavy oak door so hard the glass partitions in the hallway shuddered. I waited until his footsteps faded down the corridor. I reached over and tapped the screen of my smartphone, ending the recording. I uploaded the audio file directly to my secure, encrypted cloud server. I opened the digital folder and reviewed my growing arsenal. I possessed the handwritten restaurant invoice demanding payment for a family dinner. I possessed the downloaded property deed and the forged loan origination documents bearing David's fraudulent notary stamp. Now I possessed a crystal-clear audio recording of the Golden Child, confessing to the family's imminent financial collapse and their intent to use my cash to preserve a fraudulent facade. I was watching them eagerly dig their own graves, entirely blind to the fact that I held the shovel. David failed to extract the money, but his failure triggered the next phase of the conflict. With the 5 o'clock deadline approaching, Carol would realize her son could not deliver the funds. She would be forced to escalate her tactics. The venue contract transferring all financial liability into my name was still sitting unread in my email inbox. I needed to neutralize that contract. I needed to handle the venue manager and execute a flawless diversion to keep Carol complacent. I could not allow the anniversary party to be canceled. The country club gala was the exact stage I required for my final strike. I needed to ensure 80 wealthy guests were seated in that ballroom waiting for a toast so I could serve the legal documents that would end my parents' reign forever. I pulled my keyboard closer and prepared to draft an email that would seal their fate. I stared at the glowing computer monitor in my office, analyzing the email from the country club event manager. The subject line demanded an urgent signature. I clicked the attached document and watched a 10-page electronic contract materialize on my screen. It detailed the final arrangements for my parents' 40th anniversary gala. Carol did not just finalize the catering menu. She upgraded every single aspect of the event, without my knowledge or consent. She added an elaborate ice sculpture for the cocktail hour. She requested out-of-season orchids for the 80 guest centerpieces. She elevated the bar service to feature top-tier imported liquors. The original budget was already bloated, but this new itemized list was astronomical. At the very bottom of the final page, the venue required a $10,000 deposit to secure the ballroom by 5 o'clock today. Below the total was a section titled Primary Guarantor. Carol typed my full legal name, my personal phone number, and my professional email address into the blank fields. She also provided a credit card number to process the initial deposit. I recognized the last 4 digits of that account. It was an old joint emergency card Richard opened when I was a freshman in college. I had not used the plastic in a decade, but my Social Security number remained tied to the account. My mother was attempting a brazen financial extortion. She assumed I would absorb the deposit rather than face a public family dispute. She thought I would protect my own pristine credit score by paying the bill silently. She banked on my fear of embarrassment. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the direct line for the country club events department. Sarah, the manager, answered on the first ring. Her tone was cheerful and expectant. "This is Zoe Mitchell," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "I am calling regarding the contract you emailed me this morning." Sarah let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, wonderful, Zoe. We just need your electronic signature on the final page and we can process the deposit. Your mother has planned a stunning evening for your family." I pulled up the digital document and highlighted the guarantor section. "I will not be signing this contract, Sarah," I stated clearly. "Furthermore, I did not authorize my name to be placed on this agreement. I am not the host of this event." The cheerful customer service tone vanished from Sarah's voice. There was a long pause on the line. "I am sorry, I do not understand," she stammered. "Carol assured us you were handling the financial arrangements. She provided your contact information specifically for the billing portal." "My mother provided false information," I replied. "I am officially notifying you that I hold 0 financial liability for this gathering. You must remove my name, my email address, and my phone number from your records immediately." "But the deposit," Sarah urged her, panic rising. "The $10,000 is due by 5 o'clock. We have to order the orchids and secure the staff. If we do not process the charge today, we have to release the ballroom to another party." "Then you need to process the charge using the card Carol provided," I instructed, the card bearing her name. "If the charge declines, you must contact her directly to resolve the balance. If you attempt to process any funds under my authorization, I will file a formal fraud complaint with the Illinois Attorney General." I spoke the words with cold precision. Sarah was a venue coordinator, not a legal scholar. The mere mention of state fraud statutes terrified her. She quickly agreed to strike my identifying information from the digital ledger. She promised to run the deposit exclusively under Carol's name and handle any ensuing declines directly with my parents. I ended the call and placed the phone back on its cradle. I neutralized the immediate threat, but I knew the blast wave was coming. By pushing the financial liability back onto Carol, I essentially lit a fuse. The moment Sarah processed that deposit on my mother's maxed-out credit card, the bank would reject the transaction. Carol would receive an alert. She would realize her extortion play failed, and she would realize her perfect party was hours away from cancellation. She would inevitably storm into my apartment demanding answers. She would scream about family loyalty and duty. I needed a strategy to diffuse her anger. I could not allow the anniversary gala to be canceled. That country club ballroom was the exact stage I required for my final strike. I needed 80 wealthy guests seated at those tables, waiting for a toast, so I could serve the legal documents that would end my parents' reign. I needed to keep Carol complacent. I needed a diversion. I left my firm during my lunch break and walked 3 blocks down Michigan Avenue. I entered a premium travel agency featuring floor-to-ceiling windows and plush waiting chairs. I approached the glossy wooden racks displaying luxury vacation packages. I selected half a dozen thick brochures detailing premium Mediterranean cruises. I chose the most expensive options available, featuring private balcony suites, exclusive dining, and 2-week itineraries touring the Greek Isles and the Italian coast. I returned to my apartment and prepared the bait. My living space was modest, but meticulously organized. It lacked the sprawling square footage of my parents' Lake Forest estate, but it belonged entirely to me. I walked into the kitchen and spread the glossy brochures across my granite island. I fanned them out, ensuring the vibrant photos of turquoise water and silver ships were highly visible. Next to the brochures, I placed a yellow legal pad. I uncapped a pen and wrote a column of calculated numbers. I scribbled the phrase, "Anniversary Surprise Package," at the top of the page. Beneath that, I listed a fictional budget totaling $35,000. I circled the number twice in dark blue ink. I left the pen resting casually on top of the paper. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the prey. The lobby buzzer rang at 4 o'clock. I pressed the intercom button and authorized the front desk to grant her access. 2 minutes later, a sharp, rapid knocking echoed against my front door. I opened it to find Carol standing in the hallway. She wore a pristine beige trench coat and a silk scarf tied tight around her neck. Her posture was rigid. The scent of her expensive floral perfume preceded her into my living room. She pushed past me without offering a greeting. Her face was flushed with frantic energy. "Why did Sarah from the country club just call me in a panic?" she demanded, dropping her leather handbag onto my sofa. "She said you refused to sign the contract. She said you threatened them with a fraud complaint." I closed the front door and leaned against the wood. "I did," I answered calmly. "I told them I would not sign an agreement. I did not negotiate." Carol's eyes widened in disbelief. She paced across my rug, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "You are ruining everything," she hissed. "The deposit declined on my card. The bank froze the account because of a suspected security breach. If we do not wire those funds, the venue is going to cancel our reservation. We have 80 people arriving next week. Do you have any idea how humiliating this will be for your father? You should have secured the funds before inviting 80 people," I pointed out. She stopped pacing and glared at me, her hands balled into tight fists at her sides. She drew a deep breath, preparing to launch into a practiced monologue about my selfishness. She prepared to unleash decades of rehearsed guilt designed to force my compliance. Then her eyes drifted past my shoulder. She noticed the display spread across the kitchen island. The glossy covers of the luxury travel brochures caught the afternoon sunlight streaming through my windows. The bold letters spelling out Mediterranean Escapes and VIP Ocean Villas commanded her attention. I watched the transformation occur in real time. The rigid tension in her shoulders vanished. Her jaw relaxed. She took a slow, deliberate step toward the granite counter. She reached out her manicured fingers, brushing the heavy stock paper. She looked at the yellow legal pad. Her eyes scanned the fictional budget I drafted. She saw the circled total of $35,000 beneath the heading, Anniversary Surprise Package. The arithmetic processed inside her mind. Carol operated on a strict transactional logic. She believed everyone around her functioned using the same ruthless ledger. She stared at the numbers and drew a wildly inaccurate conclusion. She assumed I refused to pay the $10,000 catering deposit because I was already spending $35,000 on a luxury cruise for their anniversary gift. She thought the rumor she seeded among her tennis partners was actually true. The fabricated evidence short-circuited her anger. Her greed easily overpowered her panic. She turned around to face me. The furious, desperate woman from 30 seconds ago was gone. In her place stood a sweet, understanding mother, brimming with manufactured affection. Her smile returned, stretching wide across her face. "Zoe, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "I am so sorry. I should not have barged in here and raised my voice." "You were very upset," I noted, keeping my expression blank. "I was just stressed about the party details," she explained, waving her hand dismissively. "I know you have a lot on your plate right now. I know you are managing some very large financial commitments." She cast a brief, knowing glance back toward the brochures on the island. "I should not have pressured you to handle the catering bill, on top of everything else you are doing for us." "How will you secure the ballroom?" I asked, testing her resolve. "Do not worry about the country club," she insisted, picking her handbag up from the sofa. "Richard has a few dormant retirement accounts he can liquidate. We will pay the penalty fees and wire the venue the deposit tomorrow morning. We will handle the party expenses. You just focus on your beautiful surprises." She walked toward the front door, radiating a smug, triumphant energy. She paused in the doorway and offered me a bright, beaming smile. She truly believed she had won the grand prize. She thought her grooming tactics had paid off exponentially. "I will see you at the gala, sweetheart," she said. "I will be there," I promised. She stepped into the hallway and the door clicked shut behind her. I stood alone in my quiet apartment. The red herring worked flawlessly. Blinded by the illusion of a luxury vacation, Carol just committed to liquidating her husband's final safety net. She willingly anchored herself to a suffocating financial obligation to keep the party alive. She walked out of my home assuming she was sailing toward the Mediterranean. She had no idea she remained entirely liable for a sinking ship. 14 days remained until the country club event. The calendar pages turned, bringing the biting chill of early December into the Chicago streets. Outside my office window, frost coated the glass panes, blurring the sharp edges of the city skyline. Inside my downtown mediation firm, the heating vents hummed a steady, low rhythm. I spent my mornings drafting equitable division agreements for divorcing spouses, and my afternoons finalizing my own permanent exit strategy. The adult adoption petition rested inside a locked drawer in my desk. Vivian Cole and her husband Thomas had already reviewed the heavy stock pages and signed their designated portions of the legal decree. We were merely waiting for the assigned judicial officer to process the docket and stamp the official seal. The contrast between the two distinct families occupying my life presented a jarring dichotomy. My biological relatives spent their waking hours forging commercial loan documents and dodging aggressive creditors to maintain a country club facade. My chosen family spent their evenings reviewing civil statutes, ensuring my future was shielded from the incoming financial blast wave. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the flashing light on my multi-line console indicated an incoming call. The digital display projected Richard Mitchell's private cellular number. My father rarely reached out to me during typical business hours. For over 2 decades, his parenting style relied heavily on passive observation. He preferred to let Carol handle the messy, emotional labor of child-rearing, while he maintained the pristine, polished image of a detached, successful patriarch. Whenever Richard deemed it necessary to intervene directly, the situation usually required a blunt instrument. I pressed the speaker button, letting his voice fill my private office. "Hello, Dad," I answered, ensuring my tone conveyed a sterile professionalism. "Zoe," he replied. His greeting lacked any trace of paternal warmth. It was brisk and clipped, resembling the sharp cadence he utilized when dressing down his junior investment brokers. "Do you have a window to discuss the upcoming schedule? I am reviewing a client file, but I can spare a few minutes," I said, leaning back in my dark leather chair. Richard cleared his throat, a sound signaling the transition from casual inquiry to a formal directive. I want to address your role at the anniversary party next week. Your mother has worked tirelessly to ensure this gathering properly reflects our legacy. She liquidated a few mature assets to secure the ballroom deposit. It was a significant sacrifice, but we firmly believe celebrating 4 decades of marriage warrants a certain level of dignity. I listened to the calculated lie unspool. He did not liquidate mature assets. He cashed out a penalized dormant retirement account to cover a catering bill because my Mediterranean cruise decoy blinded his wife with greed. I did not correct his false narrative. I let him continue painting his masterpiece of delusion. We know you have prepared a jester for the evening. He continued his pitch, dropping into a register meant to convey solemn, unyielding authority. Carol mentioned you were researching elaborate travel arrangements. We appreciate your sudden willingness to participate in the obligations of this family. However, I need to be transparent regarding my long-term expectations. The psychological pivot was seamless. He transitioned from a grateful father into a ruthless dictator without pausing for breath. I spent 40 years building wealth and providing you with a privileged foundation, Richard stated. I expect a tangible return on that investment. You have operated on the fringe of this bloodline for far too long, Zoe. You skipped family vacations. You ignored our high society obligations. You built your independent practice using the sharp intellect I gave you, but you refused to share the rewards. This gala is your final opportunity to rectify your selfish behavior. Before I answered his accusation, my mind drifted to the countless times I witnessed Richard deploy this exact tactic against my older brother. When David wrecked his sports car as a teenager, Richard did not ground him. He merely threatened to withhold the trust fund until David memorized a scripted apology. When David failed his university courses, Richard threatened to cut off his monthly allowance. Currency was the only language my father spoke fluently. He used inheritance as a spiked collar, yanking the chain whenever his children strayed from his designated path. The profound tragedy of David's existence was that he believed the money was real, so the collar choked him. David spent his entire adult life desperately trying to please a man whose vault was empty, resulting in his own catastrophic investment failures and pending lawsuits. I, however, never wore the leash. I paid for my own law school tuition by working late shifts. I signed my own apartment lease. I funded my own existence. Richard paused, letting the heavy silence do his heavy lifting. In a corporate boardroom, that silence usually forced his opponents into a nervous capitulation. I simply stared at the speakerphone. If you do not present us with something unforgettable on that stage, he warned, the temperature of his words dropping to freezing. If your public contribution is anything less than substantial, I will make a permanent adjustment to my estate planning. The threat hung in the sterile air of my office. He was wielding the ultimate parental weapon, disinheritance. I will contact my attorneys the following morning, Richard finalized. I will strike your name from the trust. You will receive 0% of the liquid capital, the properties, or the investment portfolios. Everything will pass directly to David. You will be cut out of the legacy forever. Do we have a clear understanding? A profound quiet settled over my nervous system. The dramatic irony was a rich, potent vintage, and I drank it down. My father believed he was holding a loaded gun to my head. Thanks to my sister-in-law Nia and my own forensic audits, I knew the weapon contained 0 ammunition. The Mitchell estate he so proudly weaponized was an illusion built on predatory lending. The trust contained nothing but toxic debt, underwater mortgages, and pending civil judgments targeting his golden child son. Richard thought he was threatening to deprive me of a vast fortune. In reality, he was threatening to spare me from financial ruin. Being written out of a bankrupt will was a pure blessing. Being disowned by a man who forged my signature to steal $500,000 was exactly the legal outcome I desired. I did not laugh. I did not point out the sheer absurdity of a broke man threatening to withhold his non-existent millions. If I challenged his bluff, he might suspect I knew the truth about the shell company and the commercial loan. I needed him to walk into the country club feeling invincible. I leaned closer to the microphone. I utilized my best compliant mediator voice, projecting a flawless blend of contrition and submissive loyalty. "I understand, Dad," I said softly. "You do not need to call your attorneys." "Are you certain, Zoe?" he pressed, requiring verbal confirmation of his dominance. "I am positive," I promised. "I am going to present you with something unforgettable in front of everyone. It will be the defining moment of the evening." A long exhale crackled through the speaker. Richard sighed, satisfied his intimidation tactics yielded the desired result. "Excellent," he murmured. "That is all I needed to hear. We will see you next Friday." He ended the call. The dial tone buzzed until I tapped the disconnect button. He hung up the phone, believing he had secured his retirement cruise and forced his rebellious daughter into total submission. He walked away completely unaware that he had just authorized his own public execution. The phone call proved my parents were growing dangerously confident. They believed their manipulative framework remained intact. They successfully transferred the country club catering deposit to their own declining credit line, assuming my mythical $35,000 cruise package justified the temporary hardship. Richard deployed his ultimate threat and believed I surrendered. But confidence breeds catastrophic overreach. People who think they are winning tend to demand far more than they actually need. My father handled the psychological intimidation. My mother, however, preferred to test boundaries in the physical world. She needed to assert her dominance over my space to ensure my compliance was absolute. With the gala drawing closer, Carol decided the cruise tickets were not enough. She needed a tangible sacrifice to prove she owned me. She set her sights on my sanctuary. The following morning, a new demand arrived, establishing the dress rehearsal for the main event and setting the stage for a confrontation that would test every ounce of my professional restraint. The final week before the anniversary arrived with a bitter frost settling over Chicago. My apartment became a fortress. I loved my modest square footage. It lacked the vaulted ceilings and imported marble of my parents' estate, but it was paid for with my own currency. Growing up in the Mitchell household meant sacrificing personal privacy for public presentation. Carol treated our childhood bedrooms like museum exhibits. If a magazine editor or a country club president dropped by unannounced, our private spaces had to reflect a flawless affluence. I moved out at 18 specifically to escape the constant curation. My apartment was the one place where I dictated the rules and locked the door against their demands. Carol despised my independence. She viewed my autonomous sanctuary as a direct challenge to her authority. With the gala just days away, she decided to launch one final test of my obedience. She did not bother to call ahead or ask for permission. She simply buzzed my intercom on a Tuesday evening. I authorized her entry, knowing evasion would only provoke a more chaotic confrontation later in the week. Carol stepped into my foyer wearing a tailored cashmere coat. She did not remove her designer boots. She walked straight into my living room and began calculating the floor space with critical, sweeping glances. She announced that her older sister Patricia and Patricia's husband were flying in from Arizona for the celebration. Patricia was a terrifying woman who communicated entirely through passive, hostile observations. Patricia married a commercial real estate tycoon 3 decades ago and spent her life looking down on Carol's suburban existence. My mother spent her entire adult life competing with a sister who possessed genuine wealth. Carol stated that the Lake Forest house was simply too chaotic, with the caterers and florists setting up the staging areas. She decided my apartment would serve as the perfect free hotel to impress her demanding relatives. "You need to pack a bag for the weekend, Zoe," my mother instructed, pointing a manicured finger toward my closed bedroom door. "Patricia expects a high standard of hospitality, and I will not put her in a generic hotel room. I want fresh linens on your bed and the refrigerator stocked with imported sparkling water. You can crash on your sofa or book a cheap room near your office. It is the least you can do to help the family manage this stressful week." I looked at the woman who had ignored my existence for over 2 decades. She stood in my living room, demanding I surrender my bed to relatives who never bothered to learn my middle name. I felt a familiar, clinical detachment wash over my skin, replacing any residual shock with cold, tactical logic. "No," I replied. My voice remained steady and devoid of emotion. "I am not vacating my home. Patricia can book a suite downtown." Carol's posture rigidified. The maternal mask slipped, revealing the calculating tactician underneath. She was unaccustomed to the word no. "How dare you?" she hissed, her tone sharp and venomous. "We are hosting the most important event of our lives. We are bringing this family together to celebrate a legacy. If you refuse to fulfill your basic duty as a daughter, you are not welcome to attend the gala. I will revoke your invitation right now. You can sit here alone while the rest of us celebrate." She played her final social card. She thought the threat of exclusion would shatter my resolve. She assumed I craved a seat at her table and feared the isolation she wielded like a club. I needed her to believe I still cared about that seat, so I could deliver the legal strike on Friday night. I needed her to remain confident. I employed the red herring. "That is unfortunate," I said, keeping my facial expression entirely blank. "I suppose I will have to cancel the surprise envelope I prepared for the toast. It is a shame. I spent a lot of time organizing those premium travel arrangements. I thought a Mediterranean itinerary would be the perfect highlight for your speech." The transformation was instantaneous. The sheer mention of premium travel arrangements extinguished her outrage. Greed hijacked her nervous system, bypassing her anger. She remembered the glossy cruise brochures I planted on my kitchen island weeks ago. She calculated the value of a luxury vacation against the cost of booking a hotel room for Patricia. The math was incredibly simple for a woman who viewed relationships as a ledger. Carol offered a strained, artificial laugh. "Oh, darling, do not be dramatic," she backpedaled, waving her hand as if clearing smoke from the air. "I am just under so much pressure. I want everything to be perfect for your father. Keep your apartment. Patricia can stay at the downtown Marriott. I will see you on Friday evening. Wear something elegant." She turned and exited my sanctuary, leaving a trail of heavy perfume in her wake. She backed down the moment the ultimate prize was threatened. She sold out her sister for a phantom cruise ticket. I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the solid wood. The dress rehearsal was over. She swallowed the bait, and the stage was set. While my parents obsessed over floral centerpieces and champagne vintages, the real work was happening in the shadows. The following morning, I drove to the Cook County Courthouse. The building was a towering structure of gray stone and glass. It smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was the epicenter of fractured lives and legal resolutions. I met Vivian Cole near the security checkpoint. Vivian wore a pristine navy suit carrying a leather briefcase that contained my future. We rode the elevator in silence, ascending toward the family court division. I spent countless hours in this building representing clients, but today, I was the plaintiff seeking emancipation. The contrast between my parents' superficial panic over centerpieces and the profound gravity of this marble hallway grounded me. I was preparing to sever a 29-year bloodline. It was not just paperwork. It was the formal execution of a false identity. We approached the clerk's window. The clerk was an older woman with tired eyes who processed dozens of tragic cases before her lunch break. Vivian slid the heavy stock petition across the counter. The document outlined the formal request for adult adoption. It explicitly stated my desire to sever all biological ties with Richard and Carol Mitchell. It named Vivian and Thomas Cole as my prospective legal parents. The clerk reviewed the signatures and verified our identification cards. She picked up a heavy rubber stamp and pressed it onto the top page. The loud, definitive thud echoed in the quiet hallway. Red ink stained the paper, marking the point of no return. "We need a hearing date to finalize the decree," the clerk stated, tapping her keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Let me check the judge's calendar. We have an unexpected cancellation for this Friday morning, Department 42 at 9 o'clock. Does that work for counsel?" Vivian turned to look at me. The symmetry of the universe is rarely that precise. Friday morning, the exact day of my biological parents' 40th anniversary gala. I nodded, my heart maintaining a steady, calculated rhythm. "We will take it," Vivian confirmed. The clerk printed a confirmation slip and handed it through the glass partition. We thanked her and walked back toward the elevator bank. I held the slip of paper in my hand, reading the assigned courtroom number and the designated time. The legal reality was now a ticking clock, operating silently beneath the radar. My parents were busy reviewing seating charts and anticipating a Mediterranean vacation. They had no idea their daughter was scheduled to be legally erased 12 hours before the first bottle of champagne was uncorked. The countdown had officially begun, and the final morning of my old life was rapidly approaching. I drove back to my firm to finalize the secondary weapon. The adoption would sever the emotional and legal obligations, but I still needed to neutralize the financial threat they built using my stolen identity. I spent the afternoon drafting the formal notice of fraud investigation. I attached the forged commercial loan documents, the fake LLC registration, and the audio recording of David confessing to their bankruptcy. I prepared a pristine white envelope to house the completed dossier alongside the impending adoption decree. My mother wanted a surprise envelope to open in front of 80 wealthy guests. I was going to give her exactly what she requested. Every piece was locked into position. I just had to survive the next 48 hours without revealing the blade hidden behind my compliant smile. The storm was gathering on the horizon, and the country club was directly in its path. Friday morning broke over Chicago with a brilliant, blinding winter sun. At 9 o'clock, Carol and David were undoubtedly inside a high-end salon on the Gold Coast. I pictured my mother sipping complimentary mimosas while a stylist curled her hair into rigid waves. I imagined David checking his phone every 3 minutes, sweating through his tailored shirt, praying my mythical luxury cruise tickets would distract Richard from their impending financial ruin. I was not at the salon holding her purse. I was standing in Department 42 of the Cook County Family Court Division. The courtroom felt cavernous and solemn. Oak panels lined the high walls, absorbing the ambient sounds of the city traffic churning far below. I sat at the petitioner's table. Vivian Cole sat to my right, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that signaled her readiness for battle. Her husband Thomas sat to my left, radiating a quiet, steady calm. We faced the elevated wooden bench where the Honorable Judge Marcus Vance presided. Judge Vance was a contemporary of Vivian's from her days on the bench. He possessed silver hair and a stern face forged by decades of adjudicating broken domestic partnerships. He did not suffer fools, and he despised people who weaponized the legal system for petty grievances. Adult adoption hearings are typically administrative formalities. The presiding officer verifies the consent of all parties and stamps the decree. However, given the sheer wealth publicly associated with the Mitchell estate, Judge Vance requested a brief evidentiary review. He needed to ensure I was not being coerced into forfeiting my biological inheritance, and he required basic documentation demonstrating the irreparable nature of the original bloodline. This was the moment I prepared for. I opened my leather briefcase. I did not pull out the forged commercial loan documents. The fraud investigation was a separate criminal matter reserved for a different jurisdiction, and I needed to keep that weapon concealed until tonight. For this specific civil proceeding, I needed to prove my biological parents viewed me as a vendor rather than a daughter. I reached into my secure wallet and extracted the folded restaurant receipt from the Gold Coast Steakhouse. I stood up and walked approaching the wooden partition. I handed the crisp piece of paper to the bailiff. The bailiff carried it up to the bench. Judge Vance adjusted his reading glasses. He looked at the itemized list detailing the price of a house salad and sparkling water. He examined Carol's jagged blue handwriting demanding payment for a Tuesday evening family dinner. He scrutinized the 20% gratuity she forced me to calculate. Finally, his eyes rested on the bottom line, where my mother countersigned her name directly beneath my written phrase, "Paid in full for services rendered." The courtroom fell entirely silent. The ticking of the analog clock on the back wall echoed in the quiet space. Judge Vance lowered the receipt. He looked at me, his stern expression softening into a look of profound, quiet pity. He spent his career witnessing human cruelty, but the clinical, transactional nature of that document struck a unique chord. A mother billing her own child for a meal articulated a level of emotional bankruptcy no legal brief could adequately describe. It was undeniable proof that I was merely a customer in their lives. "The evidence is sufficient," Judge Vance stated, his voice projecting across the polished wood. "The petitioner has clearly demonstrated a lack of fundamental familial support from her biological relatives. Furthermore, the prospective adoptive parents have demonstrated exceptional character and a genuine willingness to assume all corresponding legal and emotional obligations." He picked up his heavy rubber stamp. He pressed it against the ink pad and brought it down hard onto the final page of the petition. The sharp, definitive thud sealed my fate. He picked up his pen and signed his name across the bottom line. "As of 10 o'clock this morning, you are no longer recognized as the biological offspring of Richard and Carol Mitchell," he announced, looking directly into my eyes. "The original birth certificate is hereby sealed. You are now, by law, Zoe Cole. Congratulations." I stood at the petitioner's table. I felt a sudden, sweeping lightness radiate through my chest. The heavy anchor of the Mitchell legacy detached, dropping into an ocean of relief. Vivian turned and pulled me into a fierce embrace. Thomas wrapped his arms around both of us. There were no cameras. There were no catered pavilions or imported centerpieces. There was only the quiet, authentic warmth of people who chose me simply because they wanted me in the room. They asked for nothing in return. We exited the courthouse into the frigid Chicago air. I held the certified adoption decree inside a pristine white envelope. This was the surprise I promised my father. I drove back to my apartment to prepare for the evening. Carol had instructed me to wear something elegant, anticipating a visual complement to her luxury aesthetic. She wanted a prop for her photographs. I bypassed the designer gowns hanging in my closet. Instead, I selected a simple, vintage black dress I purchased at a thrift store during my first year of law school. It cost $40. It possessed clean lines and zero pretense. It was the exact antithesis of my mother's manufactured glamour. I applied minimal makeup and pulled my hair back into a sleek, practical knot. I picked up my purse, ensuring the white envelope containing the adoption decree and the formal notice of fraud investigation was secured inside the leather lining. I locked my apartment door, feeling the satisfying click of the deadbolt. I took the elevator down to the parking garage. The drive to the Lake Forest Country Club took 45 minutes. I navigated the highway, letting the rhythmic hum of the tires center my focus. I reviewed my strategy, preparing my mind for the incoming confrontation. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the Illinois suburbs into twilight. The country club emerged at the end of a long, winding driveway lined with towering pine trees adorned with tasteful winter lights. Valet attendants in pristine white jackets scurried around the circular drop-off zone, opening doors for arriving guests. Luxury sedans and imported sports cars idled in a polished, gleaming line. I pulled my sensible used vehicle into the queue. A young attendant opened my door. I handed him the keys and smoothed the fabric of my thrifted dress. I walked up the wide stone steps toward the grand entrance. Golden light spilled through the heavy glass doors. I could hear the faint, elegant notes of a live string quartet drifting into the cold night air. I stepped into the foyer. The heat of the building washed over me, carrying the scent of expensive floral arrangements and roasted prime rib. The coat check attendant took my woolen jacket. I walked toward the main ballroom. I was a family law mediator stepping into a room filled with 80 of the wealthiest individuals in the county. But I was no longer the neglected daughter arriving to beg for scraps of affection. I was Zoe Cole. I was an independent legal entity attending a party hosted by two strangers who forged my name. I felt the crisp edge of the white envelope pressing against my hip. I pushed open the mahogany doors and stepped into the banquet hall. The sheer scale of the extravagance proved how deeply my biological parents were willing to drown in debt to maintain their illusion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over 10 circular tables draped in heavy ivory linen. Towering centerpieces of out-of-season orchids dominated the room. A custom ice sculpture bearing their initials slowly melted near the carving station. Waiters carrying silver trays of champagne glided effortlessly through the crowd of laughing, well-dressed elites. I scanned the room, locating the primary targets. The stage was perfectly set. The audience was seated. The final act was ready to begin. I stood near the back of the banquet hall, remaining perfectly still against the heavy velvet drapery. The Lakeside Club was packed with 80 members of the elite. Many of these guests had driven up from the Chicago suburbs, crossing the border into Wisconsin to attend the gala at this exclusive waterfront retreat. The room hummed with the synchronized cadence of wealth. Crystal clinked against fine china. String musicians played a classical arrangement in the corner. Waiters, carrying silver trays laden with expensive appetizers, glided silently between the circular tables. I observed the crowd through the lens of a family law mediator, analyzing the micro-expressions and the tailored costumes of people desperately trying to project invulnerability. These were the wealthy investors, the charity board members, and the local real estate developers who propped up my father's failing firm. They were the specific audience my parents needed to deceive in order to maintain their precarious social standing. Near the carving station, I spotted Duke. The golden retriever was trotting around the polished oak dance floor, receiving adoring pats from passing guests. He wore a custom silk tuxedo collar, tailored precisely to fit his thick neck. It was a glaring symbol of my biological parents' absurd priorities. They were facing imminent bankruptcy and multiple felony charges, yet they prioritized a designer accessory for a canine over their own legal safety. I watched the dog accept a piece of prime rib from a wealthy developer. For decades, that dog received the warmth and the investment that was withheld from me. Tonight, the sight of the pampered animal did not trigger a single ounce of resentment. It merely validated my decision to erase my name from their lineage. I scanned the room, locating the key players in this impending tragedy. Richard held court near the private bar. He clutched a glass of expensive bourbon, projecting the aura of a triumphant patriarch. He laughed loudly at a joke, throwing his head back in a practiced display of confidence. He believed he had intimidated me into submission. He thought the heavy inheritance threat he delivered over the phone secured his Mediterranean vacation. He was basking in the glow of a financial rescue that did not exist. A few yards away, David stood near the melting ice sculpture. My older brother was failing to maintain the facade. His tailored suit looked slightly rumpled. He kept wiping his palms against his trousers. He checked his cellular phone every 30 seconds, waiting for a catastrophe to strike. David knew the caterers were paid, but he also knew his own civil lawsuits were advancing through the court system. He was a man standing on a trap door, waiting for the lever to pull. The anxiety radiating from his posture was palpable from across the room. Then my eyes found Nia. My sister-in-law stood near the edge of the terrace doors, holding a simple glass of sparkling water. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that stood out against the sea of muted beige and gray designer dresses worn by the older country club wives. Nia was an architect. Her entire career was built upon recognizing structural integrity and identifying fatal stress fractures before a building collapsed. She was the only person in this room who recognized the rot hidden behind the floral centerpieces. She caught my eye from across the ballroom. She did not smile or wave. She simply offered a slow, subtle, knowing nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of the storm we both knew was coming. I returned the nod, feeling the crisp edge of the white envelope pressing against my hip. The string quartet abruptly finished their song, drawing a bow across the cellos. The music faded, allowing the ambient chatter of the ballroom to fill the void. A waiter approached the center stage and tapped a microphone resting on a chrome stand. The audio system hummed, signaling the transition to the formal program. Carol walked toward the stage. She wore a shimmering silver gown that caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. She carried an imported champagne flute in her left hand. She ascended the 3 carpeted steps and took her position behind the microphone. The room gradually quieted as 80 wealthy guests turned their attention toward the matriarch of the evening. The microphone emitted a sharp, whining squeal of feedback, echoing off the high ceiling. Carol smiled, unbothered, and adjusted the stand. "If I could have everyone's attention," she began, her voice echoing through the speakers with a practiced theatrical warmth. 40 years ago, Richard and I made a promise to build a beautiful life together. Looking out at all of you tonight, I can confidently say we achieved that dream. We built a legacy founded on hard work, dedication, and the unwavering support of our community. The crowd murmured their approval. Glasses were raised in a unified salute. Carol took a small sip of her champagne, pacing the stage like a seasoned politician addressing her constituents. But a legacy is truly measured by the family you raise, she continued, her tone shifting from celebratory to something far more calculated. Parenting is a profound sacrifice. We gave our children every possible advantage. We provided the best schools, the safest neighborhoods, and a standard of living most people only dream about. She paused, letting her eyes sweep the back of the room until they locked directly onto my face. I stood in the shadows, wearing my $40 thrifted dress, refusing to break eye contact. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. She was taking credit for an upbringing she outsourced to private tutors and credit cards. We all know that some children take forever to become useful, Carol said, projecting her voice to ensure every syllable landed with maximum impact. A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter spread through the audience. It was a cruel public joke wrapped in the guise of maternal exasperation. Carol was using the microphone to belittle me in front of her entire social circle. She was asserting her dominance, proving to her tennis partners and charity board members that she controlled the independent lawyer daughter who lived in the city. Sometimes you pour your heart and your resources into raising a child, she added, her smile sharpening into a cold blade, and you wonder if they will ever appreciate the investment. But I am thrilled to announce that tonight our brilliant daughter Zoe is finally about to pay her parents back. The audience laughed louder this time, clapping their hands in anticipation. The dramatic irony hanging in the ballroom air was thick and intoxicating. 80 people were chuckling at a mother scolding her daughter. They had zero idea that Carol was legally speaking to a total stranger. They did not know that as of 10 o'clock this morning, my biological connection to the woman on the stage was eradicated by a county judge. They were witnessing a performance built on a legal fiction. Carol stepped out from behind the microphone stand. She extended her right hand, holding her palm open toward the ceiling. The gesture was both an invitation and a demand. "Zoe, darling, come up here," she commanded. "Bring us the envelope we have been waiting for." The spotlight operator at the back of the room shifted the beam, illuminating the path between my position and the stage. 80 pairs of eyes turned to watch me. I did not flinch. I did not hesitate. I stepped forward into the bright, piercing light. I walked with my spine straight and my shoulders pulled back. I did not rush my pace. I moved with the slow, deliberate cadence of a mediator stepping into a hostile negotiation room. The plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps. As I walked, I engaged my professional training. I scanned the perimeter of the banquet hall. I counted the exits. There were 2 double doors leading to the lobby and 1 service exit near the kitchens. I noted the proximity of the valet station outside the terrace windows. I mapped my physical escape route, preparing for the emotional detonation. I passed Richard, who was grinning from ear to ear, ready to accept his phantom Mediterranean cruise. I passed David, who looked pale and nauseous, gripping the edge of a dining table, his knuckles turning white. I passed the golden retriever, sleeping peacefully on a velvet cushion, oblivious to the impending destruction of his luxurious ecosystem. I reached the edge of the stage and climbed the 3 carpeted steps. I stood beside the woman who spent 22 years treating me like an invisible liability, only to reclassify me as an asset the moment she went bankrupt. I looked at her outstretched hand, waiting to receive the fruits of my labor. I reached into my purse and let my fingers curl around the heavy stock paper. I pulled the crisp white envelope out into the bright stage lights, ready to close the ledger forever. I stood under the bright glare of the stage lights facing the woman who birthed me. Carol held her left hand, outstretched palm, facing the ceiling, waiting for her grand prize. Her smile was a rigid construct of teeth and lipstick designed for the photographers lingering near the entrance. She expected glossy pamphlets detailing Mediterranean ports of call. She expected me to bow my head and accept my role as the designated financier of her illusions. Instead of handing her the envelope, I reached out and took the microphone from her right hand. The smooth metal felt cold against my palm. I adjusted the chrome stand, lowering it slightly to match my height. The screech of audio feedback died away, leaving a tense, expectant hush over the ballroom. 80 of the most influential citizens in the county leaned forward in their velvet chairs. "You are correct, Carol," I began. My voice resonated through the speakers, steady and analytical. I did not raise my pitch. I utilized the precise, measured cadence I employ when deconstructing a hostile settlement offer. Parenting involves a significant allocation of resources. For 22 years, you and Richard maintained a meticulous ledger. You provided shelter and basic necessities. You also documented every perceived deficit. You operated your household the exact way Richard operates his wealth management firm. Everyone in your orbit is classified as either a liability or a performing asset. A few uncomfortable shifting sounds echoed from the front tables. The charity board members and real estate developers exchanged confused glances. This was not the standard congratulatory toast they anticipated. For most of my life, I sat in the liability column. I continued my gaze, sweeping over the audience, before locking back onto my mother. I was independent. I required no bailouts. I did not enhance your social standing because I refused to play a character in your curated country club production. I was ignored. My milestones passed in silence. But recently, your financial landscape shifted. The ledger inverted. You found yourselves in desperate need of fresh capital, and you looked at my career with renewed interest. You decided it was time to collect a return on your initial investment. You invited everyone here tonight to witness me paying you back. I reached into my purse. I withdrew the crisp white envelope. It was thick, heavy, and devoid of any festive markings. "I agree that it is time to formalize exactly what we owe each other," I stated, holding the paper out toward her. Carol snatched the envelope with eager, frantic energy. Her greed overrode any creeping suspicion regarding my speech. She tore the sealed flap open, ripping the premium paper. She reached inside and pulled out the folded documents. She expected vibrant photographs of turquoise oceans and luxury cruise suites. Instead, her eyes met dense black legal text and bright red county seals. I watched her optical processing shift in real time. The rigid smile vanished, evaporating into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. Her manicured fingers trembled slightly as she read the bold heading printed across the top of the first page: Decree of Adult Adoption. She blinked rapidly, trying to parse the legal terminology. Her brain struggled to reconcile the expectation of a vacation with the reality of a court order. "Since you only ever kept me around to be useful, I am officially resigning from the position," I announced into the microphone, allowing the declaration to ring across the banquet hall. I directed my attention back to the 80 guests. The document Carol is holding is a certified decree stamped this morning by a Cook County Family Court judge. It formally and permanently severs all biological ties between us. The state of Illinois no longer recognizes Richard and Carol Mitchell as my parents. I am legally adopted. My name is Zoe Cole. I am a stranger to the people standing on this stage. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The wealthy elite who thrived on decorum and predictable social scripts were paralyzed. They were witnessing a live public disowning, but the power dynamic was inverted. The child was discarding the parents. Richard realized the catastrophic damage unfolding before his eyes. His carefully constructed facade was crumbling in front of his primary investors. He stepped forward out of the shadows, his face flushed a deep, furious crimson. "Turn off that microphone," he commanded, his voice trembling with a potent mix of rage and panic. He gestured wildly toward the sound technician in the back corner. Zoe, stop this nonsense immediately. You are embarrassing yourself. I am merely establishing the factual baseline Richard I countered, utilizing his given name to reinforce our new legal detachment. But the adoption is only the first piece of the puzzle. Carol turned to the second document. My former mother stood frozen, staring at the red ink on the adoption decree. She moved her thumb, revealing the page underneath. I did not wait for her to read it. I provided the summary for the audience. The second document is a formal notice of fraud investigation filed today with the State Attorney General. 6 months ago, Richard and Carol realized their boutique wealth management firm was insolvent. They were drowning in toxic debt and underwater mortgages. To maintain their lifestyle and cover the catastrophic losses incurred by their son David, they needed a massive influx of cash. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the ice sculpture dripping into its silver pan. I pointed my finger directly at Richard, ensuring every investor in the room followed my gesture. They formed a shell corporation named Z. Mitchell Holdings, I explained, my words slicing through the room with surgical precision. They used my personal identifying information to secure a $450,000 commercial line of credit. They forged my signature on the secondary mortgage, utilizing my pristine credit score to bail out their sinking ship. Richard stopped moving. The furious crimson drained from his cheeks, replaced by a sickly pale gray. The mention of specific dollar amounts and shell corporations paralyzed him. His investors were sitting mere feet away, listening to a detailed accusation of felony identity theft. But a forged signature requires official authentication. I continued shifting my gaze to the back of the room, where my older brother stood near the carving station. That is where the golden child stepped in to assist. David Mitchell used his state-issued notary stamp to validate the fraudulent transaction. He authorized the theft of his own sister's identity to cover his pending civil lawsuits and keep the family illusion intact. All heads turned toward David. The guests stared at the young investment broker who suddenly looked like a trapped animal. David took a stumbling step backward, bumping into a tray of champagne flutes. The crystal shattered against the hardwood floor, producing a sharp, jarring crash that underscored his guilt. He did not deny the accusation. He simply stared at the floor, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. I turned back to Carol. She was staring at the notice of fraud investigation, her mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. The glossy country club event she engineered to save their social standing had transformed into a deposition. The trap they spent months building was intricate and ruthless. They planned to extort my savings, force me into financing this extravagant gala, and eventually leave me holding the liability for a $500,000 loan. They assumed my desire for familial affection would blind me to their predatory tactics. They assumed I would remain docile and compliant, fearing the threat of disinheritance. Instead, they handed me the tools of their own destruction. They provided the handwritten invoices proving their transactional cruelty. They left the digital footprints documenting their financial crimes. I merely gathered their mistakes and arranged them into a guillotine. The public trap they built for me just snapped shut around their own necks. Richard stood on the stage, his face turned to stone. The arrogant patriarch who threatened to write me out of his will was gone. In his place stood a broken, desperate man facing imminent arrest and total financial ruin. His investors were already whispering among themselves, pulling out their cellular phones to contact their own legal counsel. The boutique wealth management firm was dead. The Lake Forest estate would inevitably face foreclosure. The legacy they prized above human decency was obliterated. I stood in the center of the stage, bathed in the warm spotlight, feeling a profound sense of closure. The arithmetic was finely balanced. The ledger was clear. I delivered the unforgettable performance my former father demanded. I placed the microphone back onto the chrome stand. I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for a rebuttal. I turned my back on the strangers standing on the stage and walked down the carpeted stairs, preparing to exit the building and step into a life entirely my own. I placed the microphone back onto the chrome stand. The metallic click amplified through the speakers, finalizing my resignation. I did not wait for applause. I turned my back on the strangers standing on the stage and began my descent down the carpeted stairs. That was the exact moment Carol lost the singular trait she valued above all else. She lost her composure. The pristine, curated matriarch vanished, replaced by a cornered, frantic woman stripped of her script. After everything we paid for, she screamed. Her voice lacked the theatrical warmth from her toast. It was a raw, piercing shriek that shattered the elegant ambiance of the ballroom. "We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you, you ungrateful little brat." She stepped toward the edge of the stage, pointing a manicured finger at my retreating back. She expected me to stop. She expected a screaming match, a chaotic exchange of insults that would allow her to muddy the waters and drag me down to her level. She wanted a public fight to prove we were equals in this dysfunction. I did not break my stride. The calmest person in a room always dictates the narrative. By refusing to engage, I rendered her shouting powerless. Every word she screamed only solidified my case in the eyes of the audience. She was standing under a spotlight, broadcasting her transactional, venomous nature to 80 of her most critical peers. As I walked down the center aisle between the circular tables, the atmosphere in the banquet hall shifted from shocked silence to active, buzzing condemnation. The wealthy elite are notoriously allergic to public scandal that threatens their own portfolios. I watched a prominent real estate developer, a man who had invested heavily in my former father's firm, pull his phone from his tuxedo pocket and begin frantically typing. A charity board member, sitting near the ice sculpture, leaned over and whispered sharply to her husband, her eyes darting between Richard and the exit. The social execution was swift and irreversible. I passed Nia near the terrace doors. She held her glass of sparkling water, maintaining a perfect, serene posture. She offered a faint, satisfied smile. It was the expression of an architect watching a condemned building finally undergo a controlled demolition. I returned the look, acknowledging her crucial role in mapping the stress fractures. We did not need to exchange words. The blueprint we drafted had worked flawlessly. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stepped out into the lobby. The sound of my mother's voice became a muffled, distant echo. I handed my ticket to the coat check attendant, slipped on my woolen jacket, and walked out into the freezing Illinois night. The valet brought my sensible sedan around. I tipped him, climbed into the driver's seat, and turned the ignition. Driving away from the country club, the rhythmic hum of the tires felt like a steady heartbeat. The crushing, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood was gone, left behind in a ballroom filled with melting ice and ruined legacies. The poetic justice that followed over the next several months was methodical and unsparing. The formal notice of fraud investigation I served on stage triggered an immediate cascading collapse of the Mitchell empire. The state attorney general took a very keen interest in the forged commercial loan. When investigators subpoenaed the records for the Shell Company, they discovered a tangled web of financial desperation that extended far beyond my stolen identity. The bank that issued the $500,000 line of credit did not hesitate. Upon verifying the forgery and my official legal detachment via the adult adoption decree, they called the loan due in full. Richard and Carol possessed zero liquid capital to satisfy the demand. The illusion of their wealth dissolved into a stack of foreclosure notices, frozen assets, and criminal indictments. To stay out of a state penitentiary and appease the furious lending institutions, they were forced into a devastating plea arrangement. They had to liquidate every tangible asset they owned. The precious Lake Forest estate, the sprawling monument to their social superiority, was listed for a fraction of its presumed value in a rapid short sale. The luxury sedans were repossessed by the leasing agencies. The country club formally revoked their membership, citing a violation of the organization's moral turpitude clause. They were stripped of their status and exiled from the only community they ever truly loved. Richard's boutique wealth management firm was dismantled by forensic accountants. His remaining investors fled the moment the news of the fraudulent limited liability company leaked into the Chicago financial circles. David, stripped of his parental safety net, faced the full brunt of his angry clients and the regulatory board. His notary license was permanently revoked, and his pending civil lawsuits resulted in crushing judgments that would garnish whatever wages he managed to earn for the rest of his natural life. Throughout this entire agonizing process, I remained entirely immune to their destruction. The adult adoption functioned exactly as Vivian intended. It was a flawless, impenetrable shield. When collection agencies' defense attorneys and angry creditors attempted to contact me, seeking to untangle the financial wreckage, they hit a solid brick wall. Legally, I was Zoe Cole. I held no statutory connection to the Mitchell family. I was not responsible for their debts, their legal defense fees, or their housing arrangements. They were strangers who had stolen a stranger's identity, and they faced the consequences alone. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Carol attempted to reach out to me once during the darkest days of their bankruptcy. She tried to send a certified letter to my downtown mediation firm, likely filled with practiced guilt and demands for filial piety. I never read it. I instructed my receptionist to return the heavy envelope to the sender marked unknown at this address. Some doors must be permanently sealed to keep the winter out. A year passed, bringing another late autumn chill to the Chicago streets. The frantic, high-stakes drama of my former life faded into a quiet, distant memory. My mediation practice thrived, unburdened by the constant threat of extortion. I spent my days helping clients draw healthy boundaries, utilizing my own profound experience to guide them through their darkest transitions. I no longer analyzed my own life, searching for impending traps. The paranoid vigilance was replaced by a calm, steady rhythm. On the evening of my 30th birthday, I did not sit in a silent apartment waiting for a phone call that would never come. I did not log on to social media to watch strangers celebrate a pampered pet. I drove to Evanston, pulling into the driveway of a sturdy brick craftsman surrounded by ancient oaks. The porch light cast a warm, welcoming glow against the early evening frost. I walked through the front door and breathed in the scent of roasted garlic and fresh baking. Vivian stood in her warm, modest kitchen, wearing her favorite woven cardigan. Thomas was setting the farmhouse table with simple ceramic plates. There were no caterers in white aprons. There were no 80-guest seating charts. There were no golden retrievers wearing custom silk tuxedo collars. There was only the quiet, authentic comfort of a home that required no admission fee. After dinner, Vivian brought out a small round cake. It was not a $500 masterpiece crafted from organic ingredients designed to impress a country club audience. It was a simple chocolate cake baked in her own oven. Resting in the center of the dark frosting was a single lit birthday candle. The small flame flickered, casting dancing shadows across the smooth wooden table. I looked at Vivian and Thomas, observing the genuine, uncomplicated affection in their eyes. They did not view me as a performing asset. They did not keep a ledger of their hospitality. They saved a seat for me simply because they wanted me in the room. I realized in that moment that the arithmetic of my life had finally been solved. Family is not determined by a biological lottery. Family is defined by the people who show up, the people who offer warmth without demanding an invoice in return. I closed my eyes, made a silent vow to protect this peace, and blew out the candle. For the first time in 30 years, the smoke cleared, and I was finally free. Welcome to the end of the story. If you have ever been treated like a line item in someone else's ledger, let this be the proof that you hold the power to close the account. You are never obligated to fund the illusions of people who refuse to see your worth. If Zoe's journey towards setting the ultimate legal boundary resonated with you today, share this with someone who needs the strength to walk away. Drop a comment below with the word freedom, hit the subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.